Hey guys, I am the Comics Kid 2099, and I wanted to talk to you about another Superman graphic novel slash trade paperback. Over the last couple of weeks, I have been talking about storylines in Greg Rucka's run on Adventures of Superman from the mid-ish 2000s. And today, I am talking about Ruin Revealed. That is the name of this storyline. And if you've been keeping up with these reviews, when Greg Rucka first started his run, he introduced a brand new villain called Ruin. He kind of looked like Darth Maul, but it was actually a mask. It wasn't his face. And as it turns out, this villain was kind of the big bad of the whole series, and Greg Rucka was slowly building this mystery over time. This book reveals who that is. Now first, I want to say the story here is pretty decent. There's a few things about it that I don't like, but overall, this is a very well done story. The one thing that I wanted to talk about before I got to the story is, I guess I should call it the delivery of the story. It seems to me today it is impossible to find a creator that you love and just read their run on a given title. For example, if I'm enjoying Greg Rucka's run on Superman, it's becoming increasingly difficult for me to read Greg Rucka's run on Superman or Wonder Woman or Avengers or whatever it is that he's working on. For example, this book collects the following issues inside: Adventures of Superman 640 and 641, and then it jumps forward to Adventures of Superman 644 through 647. Now this is actually not too bad. It skips a couple of issues, as you notice. It gets significantly worse in the next Superman trade, the next one being Superman Sacrifice. Sacrifice actually jumps all over the place. It collects several different scattered issues from several different series. Superman 218, 219, 220, Adventures of Superman 642 and 643, Action Comics 829, Wonder Woman 219 and 220. When I first started reading Greg Rucka's run in Unconventional Warfare, I thought I was getting Greg Rucka's version of Superman, pretty much self-contained in one Superman title. We weren't going to be getting anything completely radical that would make reading the other Superman comics kind of mind-puzzling, but at the same time, we weren't really tied to anything that was going on outside of this title. Which, if you're unaware, that's actually how I prefer my superhero titles. I like to be able to read, for example, Chris Claremont's Uncanny X-Men without having to worry about what's going on in the Avengers or the Fantastic Four, or in this day and age, what's going on in the other X-Men comic. Or, as per this video, what is going on in the other Superman comic. It almost seems like as I go forward with Greg Rucka's run, it seems to get worse and worse. If you've been keeping up with these videos, I really loved the first storyline, Unconventional Warfare. I liked that Healing Touch, the second storyline, just a little bit less, and this one, I almost want to say the content is a little bit better than that Healing Touch, but I had a major issue here. Around this time, we had a big DC Comics series called Infinite Crisis, and this storyline was supposed to be touching every single corner of the DC Universe. Now, I have not actually read Infinite Crisis, but I do kind of know what was going on in that storyline. Imagine, if you will, that I had not read Infinite Crisis. This book would be virtually unreadable because so much of what's going on here is tied to what's going on in Infinite Crisis or the stories that lead up to Infinite Crisis, and if I didn't know what was going on in those comics, I would have absolutely no idea what's going on here. For example, we have mentionings of Batman creating a satellite that controls something called OMAX. We briefly get an idea of what those are, but if you haven't read the OMAX series, also written by Greg Rucka, then you're probably going to be a little bit confused. We have references of an organization called Checkmate. We don't really know what that is. Again, if you have a history of the DC Universe in your head, then you're probably not going to have a problem with this. But if you've never read a comic book before this and you just pick this up, you're probably going to be confused. You're not going to know what Checkmate is, or who Maxwell Lord is, or who Sasha Bordeaux is. Then we have references of Zatanna mind-wiping people, and if you don't read much outside of Superman, you probably won't know who Zatanna is. You're not going to know what they're talking about when they say that she's been mind-wiping people for a while. And again, maybe I'm preaching to the choir. Maybe everyone who is going to be watching this video and reading this book Perhaps they're already going to know everything about Identity Crisis and Infinite Crisis and the OMAC miniseries and the Villains United miniseries. Maybe all of you are already going to know everything about all of those stories. The problem is, I did not. I don't know what was going on in the Villains United miniseries. Other than the fact that there were things called OMACs that were hunting down heroes, I really don't know what was going on in the OMAC series. I only know the superficial details about the Checkmate organization. Other than that, I really don't know what was going on there. I don't know why they suddenly start doing stuff in this Superman comic when it seemed to me they had their own comic book going on at the same time. Other than that, for the most part, this book is basically picking up plot points from the previous two storylines in Adventures of Superman, and it's kind of running with them. You've got Pete Ross, he's kind of left the Oval Office in shame, then he's got a divorce going on with Lana Lang, then you've got the Chief of Police in Metropolis, she's kind of got rage issues and she's got her own personal thing going on, trying to hunt down the character Ruin. Then you've got the Parasite characters who showed up in That Healing Touch. If you watched my video review of that graphic novel, I said that it didn't really seem like those characters would be coming back. I was wrong. They do come back, and they are kind of important here. And then one of them just kind of disappears. I don't know if she's going to show up in the book that I will be reviewing next week if all goes according to plan. I don't know if she'll be showing up there, or if she just kind of disappeared and we don't really know what happened to her. So for the most part, if you are like me and you want to read a creator's run on a book, for example, Greg Rucka's run on Adventures of Superman, for the most part, this book reads kind of like that. There is about 50% of it that ties into other things going on outside of the Superman book, and like I said when I talked about That Healing Touch, I'm not entirely sure if that's Greg Rucka's fault or if that is the fault of his editors who were kind of pushing him to tie into Infinite Crisis and Identity Crisis and all those other storylines that were going on around this time. But then you've got other things going on. For example, there was a friend slash co-worker of Clark Kent. He was working at the police station as a beat reporter who would work on the crime section. And there were a couple of other reporters from different newspapers who were also working there. And then one of the characters, Jerry, she was kind of sort of the anti-Clark Kent. She didn't really seem to have a passion for journalism that Clark had. And then she was kind of sort of introduced as a new co-worker for Clark Kent. Well, then out of nowhere, she's working at the Daily Planet in this book. I don't know if this was something that happened in another Superman title, like Superman or Action Comics. I have no idea. I guess I'm supposed to know. If I'm reading this, I'm supposed to suddenly have a knowledge of everything that's going on in the DC universe, or maybe it just happened in between issues and it's only being referenced here, and so if I've been reading Adventures of Superman, then I'm not supposed to be behind, and this is the first that I'm hearing that this girl is now working at the Daily Planet. And then we've got this guy named Loving. He is apparently Clark Kent's editor. Clark Kent is still working at the Daily Planet, but he's no longer working directly under Perry White. I really don't know what's going on here. Again, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be reading Action Comics and Superman as well as Adventures of Superman. I guess I could be. I'm not opposed to that. But if I'm reading Greg Rucka's run on Adventures of Superman, I kind of want it to stand on its own, and I don't want to have to read 45 other titles from the DC Universe to understand what's going on here. This book, I guess, tries to make this better. In between 2 or 3 issues here, we get a little text piece that tries to explain what's been going on in other titles that are not collected in this book. For example, it might try to explain, oh, okay, Zatanna was over here mind-wiping criminals. If you've only been reading Greg Rucka's run on Adventures of Superman, you might want to know that. The problem with that is, I don't want to be reading a comic book and then right in the middle of the book, it's interrupted with a large, boring text piece that is basically filling me in on story that I do not have in this book. If I buy a book for $15, I don't want to find out that I don't have the complete story in that book. I want the complete story for $15, and these text pages that are telling me that I've missed stuff in other stories like Identity Crisis or Infinite Crisis or OMAC, that kind of makes me feel like I wasted my money if I paid the cover price, because I'm still not getting the full story, even though it tries to tell me what I missed in other comic books. Compare this, if you will, to going to the movies. Let's say you went to go see Ender's Game this week. That's a movie that just came out a week or so ago by the time you're seeing this video. Let's say you go to see that movie, and then right before the movie it says, oh, by the way, guys, you're also going to have to go and see Gravity, which at this point is still in theaters, if you want to really understand everything that's going on in this movie. If people who want to go see Ender's Game go to see Ender's Game and they find out that they've actually been misled about this being a standalone movie, and they actually have to go and watch a movie that they have no desire to see, that's not going to make them any more interested in seeing that movie that they have no desire to see. It's the same thing here. I really don't want to read Identity Crisis. I don't want to read Infinite Crisis or OMAC. Even though it's written by the same guy who's writing this comic book, I don't want to read those things. When I want to read Superman, I want to read Superman. I don't want to read how the world is reacting to Wonder Woman snapping Maxwell Lord's neck. I don't want to read how the world is reacting to these killer OMAC robots that are trying to hunt down superheroes. I really don't want to read about that. So, beyond all of this, which I have spent about 90% of this video complaining about, the story here is pretty decent. If you can get past all of the tie-ins to all of the other stories that were happening in the DC Universe, the story here is basically Superman hunting down the villain Ruin and trying to find out who he is, and he eventually does find out who he is. Now, I'm not going to tell you who he is because I feel like that would be too much of a spoiler, just in case you're interested in reading this book. I, however, was not extremely happy with the reveal. I feel like it's a little too modern age dark, if you know what I mean. After dark comic books in the 1980s, like The Dark Knight Returns or The Watchmen, we had a slew of comic books that were trying to reproduce that grim and gritty feel that those comic books kind of brought to the forefront in the mid-80s. And this really does feel like it's trying to capture that without really bringing the soul that those books felt like they had. And I know I'm not really talking in very clear terms, especially since I'm not telling you who the villain actually is in this book. So maybe I should go ahead and say the villainous reveal here does reveal that Ruin is a friend of Clark Kent. If you have been reading these Adventures of Superman books that I've been reviewing along with me, you would probably already know that, because that was basically revealed to the reader in the previous volume, That Healing Touch. So it's not especially a spoiler here. But anyway, the idea that, oh, one of Superman's good friends turns out to be one of his worst enemies in this run of Superman doesn't really feel like something that I want to see. It feels too dark and modern agey. I feel like it's also just kind of lazy. It feels like something that you would have seen in The Dark Knight Returns or The Watchmen. Like, hey, look, an old friend of ours is actually an evil supervillain. That's very twisted. That's very new. And it really doesn't feel new. At this point, this kind of thing was already 20 years old. We had already seen this sort of thing in The Watchmen. Other than that, that's about all I have to say here. I know I really complained about this book a lot in this video. I actually enjoyed it a little bit. I just didn't like all of the tie-ins to stuff going on in the DC Universe. It made me feel really confused, and I don't feel like I should feel confused when I'm reading a Superman comic book. I know a decent amount about Superman, so I should be able to jump right in and understand what's going on. But here, I felt like I was a tourist in a city with no maps, if you will. Yeah, this book was just kind of so-so. It wasn't abusively bad, but at the same time, it was not stellar. It was just kind of there. I think that Greg Rucka's run on Adventures of Superman, when all is said and done, I'm going to be the guy that says it started off really great and then it just kind of petered out toward the end. I've got one more book in his run to read. I mentioned it earlier, Superman Sacrifice. Probably I will be reviewing it next week if all goes according to plan. So with that being said, that is my review. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, I hope you will like, share, comment, and subscribe. And that is about all I have here. So I will probably see you guys tomorrow with a different kind of video. Until then, have a great day.